I think that we can just get rid of so much of the messaging of our society that like something's wrong with you because you're a woman, or you have to feel like crap because you're a woman. Your periods have to be bad. It's normal. Just deal with it. This is your lot in life. And I just don't believe that any of that is true.
I gotta get myself a little more faith, a little more love.
I'm your host, Krista Bigler, and I'm going to guess we have at least one thing in common, that we're both in pursuit of a less stressed life. On this show, I'll be interviewing experts and sharing clinical pearls from my years of practice to support high-performing, health-savvy women in pursuit of abundance and a less stressed life. One of my beliefs is that we always have options for getting the results we want, so let's see what's out there together. All right, today on The Less Stressed Life, I am talking to Leisha Drews, who is a mom of three. She's a nurse. She is a functional diagnostic nutrition certified and holistic hormone coach and host of the Happily Hormonal Podcast. We've spent the last 20 minutes talking about motherhood, about cycles. That's a little bit what we're going to talk about today. She brings a unique understanding of how our body systems work together and how stress on the body and mind impact overall health. So basically, we are very similar in our feelings and our approaches. We were just talking about the use of minerals, and I was just sharing with her how today is supposed to be day one of my menstrual cycle, and she laughed because she interviewed me for her podcast approximately 1 month ago, and apparently I said the exact same thing. So it feels kismet that we are going to go ahead and chat about the topic of arranging your life around essentially your menstrual cycle. And I don't know how you phrase it, Leisha, exactly, but I know we're going to talk about motherhood, business, life related to the cycles of your body, which I think is this beautiful conversation because nature also has cycles. And I'm going through a whole phase right now where I'm like reflecting all of our health to nature. So welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about this. I think that the concept of seasons and cycles has just been one that I've gone more and more, I was going to say in depth, but almost just like more intuitively into as I progress in motherhood and business and just like life as a woman. And it has been one of the most almost like calming and grounding concepts for me just to understand that I don't have to have the same expectations of myself in every single day and moment and week of my life.
I was on a walk last night with my sister-in-law, who's also a dietitian who lives next door. And I was telling her it took me a minute to get to her house because we needed to have a lot of snacks before I came after work. Mm-hmm. And then because this is how our lives are, I was like, it's fine because my period is tomorrow. So my appetite is up. So I wanted to eat X, Y, Z. And the good news was it wasn't all chocolate, which I feel could be some mineral stuff there. It was actually just straight up carbs-ish. I was just hungry, just in general hungrier. And I love what you said there. It's so often women, we kick ourselves because it's like we're not just completely the same all month long. And it's like, what if it's beautiful that we're not exactly the same every single moment? We're going to talk about your story here in a moment, but I just think about why should you care about this topic? If you see yourself getting bloated once a month, I always have to stop and ask people like, it's okay. It's not like crazy abnormal to have that. I work with a lot of skin flares. We see skin flares with menstrual cycles. And then in general, the conversation here is like productivity around business and motherhood. And I like feel this to my soul because literally on a podcast recording yesterday, someone said, the words of my soul, which were something like, am I even being valuable if I'm not achieving this thing? And so there can be a lot wrapped up in there. And so tell me about, I love that. I think this is like the real mountaintop experience when you get to a point where it's like, oh, life can be a bit cyclical and I can welcome it. But let's talk about your story a little bit before we get into it and why you even love this topic. Why do you love supporting women in hormone balance? Tell us your story first.
Yeah. So I think it's so great the way you say like why I love this topic, because I think that we are similar in that there are these very niche topics that I'm like, I will talk to you as long as you want about this. And especially if you're like somebody that I'm sitting next to at my daughter's dance practice or whatever. I'm like, so what day of your cycle are you on? Like before I say hi, what's your name? And that's a little dramatic. That's not really happening all the time. But I just think that my overall perspective has just grown in that women are so underserved in understanding their bodies. And there is just so much grace that can come from understanding what's happening in our bodies. And that's the quick answer of why I love this so much. But to do a little introduction to me, I started my career in the hospital as a registered nurse. I started on like the med surg floor and just did like all the things with all the people. It was just like a general hospital floor. And as I went through that journey, I was in the hospital for 10 years and switched all around different places. But I had my first baby within those first couple of years and was like investigating some symptoms of my own because as I went through nursing school and tried the traditional medicine method for things like migraines and hormonal acne and irregular cycles and things like that, I was just really not impressed with the care that I got, with the answers that I got. And my mind is always asking, okay, but why is this happening? Not just what kind of like Band-Aid can we slap on it? And so as I was going through my years of working in the hospital, I just really got into it because I loved helping people and I wanted people to be better and I wanted them to feel seen and heard in their journey and taken care of. And I was able to do a lot of that as a nurse. And I also noticed that I was seeing the same people come back over and over sicker every single time they were sicker. And this is talking about more of an aging population. And I live in Oklahoma. It's not known for being the healthiest state. I think it's like the third unhealthiest or the third most obese, or it's not like in the running for one of the healthiest states. And with that being
That damn
said,
sweet tea
with
you guys
such
drank, Leisha. Sorry. Just joking. I'm just screwing with you.
It's
I was at a wedding there
there's
like
a
a couple weeks
lot.
ago and I was like, yeah, yeah. Oh,
Oh
we're in
my
the
God,
South.
really.
I'm sorry. I
Yeah.
really interrupted
Yeah.
a beautiful thing you were saying.
No, there are so many problems with the food that is consumed here, and the sweet tea may be a
I'm
part of
not
it for
judging.
sure.
I'm not
But
judging. I'm just joking.
yeah, no, I totally get it. So just seeing people come back sicker and my role as a nurse, I wasn't able to really do anything to like help them in the meantime while they were at home. And even the like dietary information we were giving them was just terrible. It was literally terrible. We'd have people come in, they were on the diabetic diet. I don't know if you worked in the hospital or not, but I think you worked in some of this like
to do a
general.
clinical, and then I worked stage renal disease for 8 years actually, so I got to see all the things.
Okay. So I'm sure you have a lot to say about the renal diet, which I do as well. But I remember the one that like really caught my attention was the ADA diet, which is the American Diabetic Association. And it's the 1,800 calorie diet. And that was like literally the only limitation they would put on these people with diabetes was that they had to have 1,800 calories instead of a little more. And they could only have like diet soda, diet jello, but they would eat like spaghetti and meatballs and bread and diet soda for dinner. Or it was just like straight carbs.
Whoever interpreted that in the kitchen didn't do a very good job, is what I would say.
No, absolutely not. So hopefully
they were like,
hospital in America,
we didn't
other
quite
than the one I
understand this. We didn't get that.
Every hospital in America, other than the one I worked at, hopefully is doing better on that. But it was a key point in my mind. I'm like, what are we doing to help people who are having issues with insulin and their metabolism? And we're just telling them to drink diet soda and that's it. And I found that the patients that I was working with, it was COPD and heart disease and all of these things. And it takes a lot to turn that around, but we weren't doing anything to turn it around. And I didn't have the time as a nurse with the floor I was working on at that point, I had 6 patients. That's a lot of patients if you're not a nurse and you don't know. Like you're going to run around for the entire 12 hours trying to keep everyone happy, alive, like all the things. So all that to say, I really wanted to be able to help people either get better when they were sick or not get that sick in the first place. And I found that the hospital was not the place that I could really do that. And so I went through my own discovery health journey and found a functional medicine practitioner who was able to help me and help my daughter with some of our symptoms. And I was like, this is it for me. I want to be able to find the actual why. And I want to spend time with people to hear their story, hear what's going on. And I want to do the digging and the research and find things out. And so that really morphed over a few years into I just want to help everyone in the world. And then from there, I realized, oh, hey, I can't help everyone in the world. I probably need to figure out what I'm doing so I can help someone actually really well instead of trying to research every single chronic health condition in the world. So what I found was I loved working with women and I loved working with moms, because when I work with women who want to be moms or women who already are moms, you make such a huge impact, because as the woman in the house, most of the time, your decisions about food and health and like your beliefs are going to shape your entire family. And so I just found that I loved that. And as I was working with women, I saw that I had a story of being completely, I would say, underserved or just like undereducated, whether it's on me ultimately, but I had no idea what was going on in my body and with my cycle. And my cycles were irregular. And every single month I thought I was pregnant when I was like 4 days late, when actually I was 4 days late every single month. It was just like a whole thing. And I'm like, I went through nursing school and I still didn't have one clue what was going on with my cycle. Like, also, I had a mom who like tried to tell me what was happening, but what about the girls who had none of those things? Like, this is where I love to be able to help, because when we can understand our cycles, I think that we can just get rid of so much of the messaging of our society that like something's wrong with you because you're a woman, or you have to feel like crap because you're a woman. Your periods have to be bad. It's normal. Just deal with it. This is your lot in life. And I just don't believe that any of that is true.
I think we are soul sisters in a way. There was a lot of things. I think that a lot of people who work in conventional medicine were listening and nodding their head. And I'm always looking to know more people. It just lights me up. And so I recently ended up in a network of people who are like seeking change, but all these different disciplines. So from nurses to PAs to et cetera. And to your point, and even my clients, at any given time, sometimes a third of them are practitioners of some sort, because you get it, you care, I understand. And there was quite a large time frame, give or take 4 years, around COVID, especially right before, maybe during early times. I would ask people about how they made that decision to like really leap, because it's uncomfortable to go from their traditional work. And to be honest, and I heard parts of it. And I always tell people this: start with your own journey. Your own journey is the first step, because you learn the most through your own results. And because you were able to achieve results, and honestly, even if it wasn't all perfect and you had ups and downs, all of those things informed how you help people now. For me also, like, I saw people and it was not really always a good fit, or they did things that I thought were not the most helpful, like big, long supplement graveyards, for example. And so therefore I chose, out of like trauma response is an overstatement for sure, but out of that response of do better. And so I hear that you did these very typical helping nurse activities and human clinician. And this is where I think we go wrong sometimes, like bad mouthing conventional medicine. It's not that the people there don't want to help you. It's just that the container is not ideal for it, right? It's Leisha's got already all these people. And what are we supposed to do with this really advanced case already at this point? It's not amazing, right? There has to be education, but there also has to be a desire from that person, right? And something not maybe popular for me to say here, but it's okay for this audience, because this is a really awesome audience, is that we have personal responsibility, right? And that's just like a outstanding thing in our world. But anyway, I just needed to like underline several things. I want to know though about the challenges from jumping from, because I think this is where a lot of people listening actually are, is they hear your story and they're like, oh, wow. But then so often you go look at someone and she's already at this point, right? Because we often want to compare our chapter 1 or 2 or 0 to someone else's chapter 12. And just tell us a little bit about like that journey, making the decision to leave med-surg, to leave your very comfortable, stable nursing career. What happened there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love remembering this because I've been in practice essentially 5 years now outside of the hospital. And that sounds like such a long time and such a short time. It's like both. And I obviously not like a very long time, but it's time is just such a weird thing. But as I had both of my first kids, I had 2 kids at that point, and my second was, I think, around 1. And I have a very supportive husband, and a husband who also is a nurse and has a lot of desire to help people, and to just had seen a lot of really good benefits in our family from making changes that weren't necessarily aligned with what we learned in nursing school. And so he was very supportive, and he's like, what are you going to do? How are you going to do it? And so I was working part-time as a nurse. Yeah, I was working part-time as a nurse. So I worked 3 days every 2 weeks, which is like half-time as a nurse, 12-hour shifts. And so that gave me technically a lot of time to pursue what I was doing, except for I had 2 kids, and they've always been home with me. They don't go to daycare. They don't go to school. They've been homeschooled, or as babies, they're just home with me. And so I really, as I did the first program I did was FDN. And as I did that, I heard Rachel Hollis at one point say, if you're going to start a business or start something, like 5 hours a week. I heard her say 5 hours a week. I don't know anything else that she's ever said, but that really stuck with me. And I was like, 5 hours a week. Where's my 5 hours? I'm going to make this happen. And that was truly how I started.
Love this.
Was 5 hours a week. And I got through it. And I was like, okay, 2 of my hours are before the kids get up this day. 1 of my hours is during nap while I'm folding laundry. And it was just like, I just got through it little by little, got through the program. And then once I had finished my certification, then that's where I was like, I'm going to help everyone in the world, because I was just so on fire and so ready to do that. But gut health was a really big part of my story and my daughter's story. And so I was like, gut health, this is what I'm going to start with. And I really did a lot of local networking, specifically through one of the chiropractor that we had gone to for a long time. And they had a pretty big practice, and they were really helpful and on board with helping me find some of my first clients. And then from there, there's all the layers. But I really just started 1 or 2 days a week. I would have my husband home or a babysitter, and I went to this office and started working with clients. And I still was working part-time as a nurse, because I tend to hold on to things a little bit and try to create safety in my own life. And so, nope, not letting go of this yet. But the funny part is I was working somehow. I think I say I worked 1 day a week, but then it turns out I remember this conversation with my husband. He was like, you can't have 3 jobs and work 1 day a week. That doesn't actually work. So I was working on the floor as a flex nurse at this point. So like all over the hospital. And then I also was working as a nursing instructor for students at clinicals. And then I was also trying to have my business 1 day a week. So there was a point where my husband said, your math isn't mathing anymore. Like, you've got to quit something.
Sounds like
and so I quit working on the floor.
Just very simple. That's all it is
simple.
At the end of the day. It's like, where's the math that supports this, right?
Right. Yes. Your math, it's just not working. So slowly but surely is the long story short, I transitioned out of the hospital. And then and then because my teaching job allowed me some time to like work on my business as well, I kept that a little bit longer. And then I think it was actually just before, no, it was, I don't know, it was in 2019. My husband was like, more math isn't mathing, like, you've got to stop. And so I just focused on my business at that point a couple days a week. And so I always have been working about 2 days a week at the most. It's been 3 as I've been working with my clients. And honestly, just like slow and steady has been the best case scenario for me. And things have changed as I've gone. And the way that I have marketed used to be all social media. And now I do my podcast because that's more aligned for me. And that it's just, I think that knowing what the one next step has been really good. But I would say really like feeling called into this, praying through what I'm doing, like just trying to really stay aligned with where God is leading me, and also having a very supportive husband, because there was a point where I was just working on my business and I wasn't actually making money. So he was working full time to be able to keep us afloat, but supporting me in being able to work for free for a while. And that was a huge thing. If I didn't have a supportive husband, then I would have had to work a lot more hours away from my kids in that transition phase.
Yeah. Thanks for being so honest and transparent with us about that, because sometimes people just need to hear that evidence of what that can look like. And I think what you did sounds totally reasonable. And to your point about what you heard from Rachel Hollis, isn't that funny how that works? Like sometimes you just hear the message you need to hear, or that message lands differently. And it's, I'm going to use that one. That's my rocket fuel right there. That's all I needed. So I loved it. And the other really wonderful thing, and I think this is ending up being a really gorgeous conversation as we start to peel back the layers and how we're getting into our menstrual cycles and why it really matters and whatnot. So you started really working on gut health, which, whether you knew it or not when you started, really supports your hormonal health, right? Because the reality is I think hormones are secondary to everything else that people usually work on underneath. And so let's get into the conversation around menstrual cycles and ups and downs. So I'm going to let you just take the floor and give us definition around the menstrual cycle as it stands, how a person might feel in different phases of the month. That might be the best way to talk about it, is like, how might I feel at this part of the month, this part of the month, and this part of the month? Would you walk us through that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that your audience has a lot of research and a lot of knowledge under their belts. And I also know that sometimes this is a skipped step. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the hormones are actually doing, just as a refresher for some of you and as a like, oh, hey, who knew
Because you
for the
don't
rest of
usually
you.
apply that information all the time. So it's great.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm looking at a menstrual cycle, I just want to give a couple of quick disclaimers. I'm going to talk about this cycle like it's 28 to 30 days. I consider a good, pretty normal cycle to be somewhere between 26 at the very least, 27 to somewhere around 35. So if you're in that window, I consider that to be like a pretty happy place to be. I'm still going to ask questions about it. But if you're far outside of that window where you're having like 22, 24-day cycles, or you're having like 37 or 60 or 80-day cycles, those are definitely outside of my considered range of normal. And there's something going on underlying that's causing that. But I'm going to talk about 28 to 30 days just as a standard and just know that your numbers may be a little bit different. So day one of your cycle is going to be the first day of your bleed. And that is going to be a part of your cycle where your estrogen and your progesterone, the two main hormones we're looking at in a menstrual cycle, are going to be at their lowest point. And that drops off just like a day or two before you start to bleed, because that's what allows your next cycle to start. And that's what allows the bleed to happen, is that drop in estrogen and progesterone. And the really cool thing about this is that when your estrogen and your progesterone are at their lowest point, it changes the way your brain works to some extent. And some of us think of this in a negative way because we're essentially taught to, or because of our own experiences where it really hasn't felt very fun to be on your period. But I think that when we can shift the script and kind of think of this differently, it is really cool that at this time of your cycle where you may have lower social energy and you also may have lower physical energy and just not feeling maybe the same level of motivation that you typically have, or the same level of focus, or maybe you just want to wrap yourself in a little cocoon, regardless of period pain or not. This is your body's intuitive nature saying, hey, it's okay to slow down here a little bit. And the beautiful thing about a really optimal menstrual cycle is that it's optional if things are good. Now, listening to your body is always something that I recommend, and life also happens. So if you're having symptoms that like knock you out and you have to be on the couch this day one, day two, three of your period, your body is telling you loudly, listen, like you need to slow down. There's something going on. But if this is just like more of a gentle feeling of, I'd prefer to spend a little time by myself, I'd prefer not to run around like crazy today, I don't want to plan all the things, then this is a gentle invitation for you to actually lean into those changes in your brain that would allow you to be more analytical and to plan for your next month. And so with those increased neural connections in this part of your cycle because of the low hormones, this is actually a really optimal time in your cycle to do planning and analyzing. So in motherhood, there's multiple opportunities for this, whether that's meal planning or budgeting or like planning your calendar, whatever that looks like. I love planning my calendar in this part of my cycle as much as possible because you are less likely to overcommit, because you're a little maybe less people pleasy and a little bit more realistic. And you're like, actually, 17 birthday parties doesn't sound great to me right now. So I'm going to say yes to 2 and the rest are no. And so I think that it's really helpful to have that information and to also just see the beauty of, okay, my social energy is lower and my physical energy is lower. And so if I can just use that to the best of my ability to like take a little quiet time, sit down, do this planning instead of just, this is the worst, I don't want to do anything. There really is a difference in that of just being able to use your strength, even in this like part of your cycle that maybe everyone doesn't love as much. So that's week one. Obviously in business, for those of you who are business ladies, like there's all the ideas, right? This is where you can plan your month. This isn't where I would do team meetings or I would tell everyone about my plan, but this is where you can analyze what happened last month. You can make plans, make goals, like all of those things during this first few days of your cycle. And then as we go into the next phase of your cycle, the follicular phase, this is where you're working up to ovulation. And this is going to be days like 5 through 14-ish if you ovulate around day 14. And this is where your estrogen is rising. And so estrogen is the hormone that is going to build up the uterine lining. And it is the hormone that creates the ability to make cervical fluid. And it's also going to trigger your luteinizing hormone and your follicle stimulating hormone to be able to ovulate. So estrogen rising at this part of your cycle is not negative estrogen dominance. You want estrogen to be dominant in the first half of your cycle. So I just want to clarify that these changes throughout the cycle are what actually creates the cycle in the first place. And so in the follicular phase, the optimal cycle would be that you start to have more energy, more motivation, more focus. And that actually is because having enough estrogen upregulates some of your neurotransmitters like serotonin and even dopamine and creates more of that, not only physical energy in your body because you're out of that low hormone phase, but you also oftentimes have a lot more creative and social energy. So I don't know if you have read the book, Your Brain on Birth Control, or read some of Dr. Sarah Hill's work, but she talks about that there is a marked difference in your attractiveness to strangers, even like your strangers or obviously, hopefully your spouse as well during this follicular phase. But even your voice can be considered more attractive by strangers than it would be in your luteal phase a couple weeks later, because you just have this energy that you don't have in other phases of your cycle. So coming into your follicular phase, this is where you are most fertile, and that cervical mucus is a key for fertility sign. But as thinking about how you may feel, just knowing that this would be a good time to plan those things that are going to be more social, take more of your energy in your business, like creating content or showing up on calls, or the things that probably would honestly take the most out of you at other times of the month. Sometimes you can just be on fire during this phase for those type of things because of that rise in estrogen and the subsequent rise in other hormones. And then there's even a peak of testosterone right around the middle of your cycle as well. And so when we're looking at exercise tolerance and lifting, those things are going to be more prime in this part of your cycle as well. And so I think that the thing that we can go to that may be a little bit extreme is I just have to do every single thing in this part of my cycle. And then we can wear ourselves out in that too. But when we're looking at, again, an optimal menstrual cycle, we're looking at gentle waves, not huge roller coasters of changes in both physical symptoms and emotions. So knowing that the follicular phase is a great phase in motherhood or in business to just really be where you need to be on and where you need to be creative. And maybe this is the time you do the fun summer things with your kids because you really want to, not because you're oh, I have to be the fun mom. Because I really love to be a fun mom. That's who I am at my core. And sometimes when I'm a late luteal or on my period, I'm man, being a fun mom is a lot of work. But when I'm in my follicular phase or post ovulation, I'm being a fun mom is truly who I am. So just knowing having those changes doesn't mean that you're crazy. I think that's something I hear so much is women are I feel like I'm crazy. You're not. You just don't have the awareness that where you are in your cycle may affect you to a different extent based on what your hormones are doing. So I think that's the first two phases. And then I will continue into the ovulatory phase.
I was going to say, to hinge on the comment of no awareness, to everyone's point, I often have to look at my period app almost every month to figure out why I don't want to talk to people that day. I'm why? What is wrong with me today? Oh, let me go look. Oh, my period starts tomorrow. That explains my life. I'll be fine in a day or two. It'll be all good. But that said, to me, this is something I prefer. Wherever you can automate something in your life, and that's where an app, I'm not paying for an app. I'm not really looking at it for advice. I'm literally looking at it to tell me to keep track of something for me in my life. So however you want to do that. Do you have an app? I'm using an app called Pinkbird. No affiliation. Don't care whatsoever. Do you have anything? Do you have one or three that you like, or maybe you don't like them?
Yeah.
If you're urinating a lot when you're drinking water, maybe you're not actually hydrating that much. Or in other words, getting the fluid and nutrients into the cell. Electrolytes are minerals that help fluid and nutrients get into the cell. I recommend all of my clients start by drinking electrolytes when we begin our work together to improve energy. And then we get even more strategic with our electrolyte recommendations as test results come in. Now, generally, electrolytes are potassium, sodium, and chloride. One of my favorite electrolyte products is Pickleball Cocktail from Jigsaw Health because it's one of the only products you can get with an adequate dose of potassium to meet my recommendations, which is critical for blood sugar, which everyone should care about, hormone health, and digestion. Huge thing for relapsing digestive issues. Jigsaw Health is also maker of the famous adrenal cocktail, made popular by the pro-metabolic corner of the internet and Root Cause Protocol, as well as a multi-mineral electrolyte for recovery called Electrolyte Supreme. You can get a discount on all of Jigsaw's amazing products, including Pickleball, Electrolyte Supreme, and Adrenal Cocktail at jigsawhealth.com with the code LESSSTRESSED10. That's 3 S's, less stressed 10.
So my favorite one is Kindara because there's 2 reasons. It is free. Love that. When I work with clients, I love to track their cycle. It's one of the nerdiest fun things that I ever love to do. And so it has a feature that lets me see their cycle on the backside. So I love Kindara for that. But I actually, when I first learned to track my cycle, I started using Kindara, and it has a great knowledge base in it that helps you understand fertility signs and what your chart is saying and all of those things for free. And so I personally don't always track my temperatures right now because I know what's happening in my cycle. But when I'm working with clients who are learning, I like to track temperatures. And so that's what I look at in Kindara. And you can just track the first day of your period in Kindara as well. You don't have to track everything.
I would say that is probably the most popular app among practitioners. We'll come back to temp tracking so I can let you finish talking about menstrual cycles. I definitely have comments, but carry on.
Okay. And I do love really quick what you said about automating. I never would want this conversation to be okay, now I have to think about every single day of my cycle and what I'm supposed to be feeling and what I'm not. When I first understood this concept, I had the little printout and I was like, okay, let me just pay attention to this a little bit and see if this lines up for me and where it does and doesn't. And then it became intuitive over a couple months, but it doesn't have to be like a whole thing. It's just really paying attention to how you're actually feeling and then maybe lining it up and saying, oh, I notice I actually feel like this every single time I ovulate. Maybe that means something. So the next phase is moving into ovulation. This is a short little phase. Ovulation actually is a momentary thing that happens. It doesn't take long for the egg to burst through the wall of the follicle, but there is a hormonal shift that happens over a couple of days. And so it's this peak of estrogen that triggers the luteinizing hormone to actually release the egg from the follicle. And this little follicle, this is another one of my favorite things about the menstrual cycle with the follicle, is this little capsule that holds the egg until it's ready to be released. And then this tiny little follicle collapses and becomes a temporary organ called the corpus luteum. And it makes your progesterone, not only for the next, hopefully 2 weeks of your cycle, but if you get pregnant, it makes that progesterone for you until your placenta is ready to take over. It's just this amazing, smart, tiny little organ that gives us progesterone, which is a hormone that is pro-thyroid, pro-metabolism. And oftentimes progesterone, I think, gets a little bit of a bad rap because in the luteal phase, which is where progesterone is dominant for the next couple weeks of your cycle, this is where symptoms often arise. But it's not often because progesterone is causing a problem. It's often because there are lots of other issues that are causing your hormones to be out of balance, specifically estrogen to be out of balance and inflammation to be rising during that part. So little quick phase of ovulation is the time from estrogen rising, the egg actually being released, and then testosterone being high as well. And then we have progesterone rise within about 24 hours of ovulation occurring. And then that progesterone taking over kind of signals the start of the luteal phase. So this little tiny ovulation phase, to me, it's a little bit of a carryover from the follicular phase as far as mood and energy and productivity. It's usually just a smooth transition into, it's still a higher energy, higher motivation phase. And then we kind of transition into the luteal phase, which I like to divide up into 2 different parts. So typically what I see is that this progesterone rise just creates a smooth transition where you still have, pretty good energy, pretty good social skills, but maybe it's not necessarily quite the high or high libido that you may have had In the follicular phase, it's a little bit more of, I like to describe it as a slow and steady, where you're like, okay, this is just like who I am as a person, feeling pretty good. I love recommending that this is a great time to look back at those plans you made in your period phase, see what happened in follicular, and then check things off the list, whether that's in business or in motherhood. This is a great time for communication in whatever part of your life it needs to be, because it's just like a pretty steady phase for this around the first 5-ish days of your luteal phase. So this is going to be days, we'll just say 17 through 22-ish. So right in the middle of your cycle. And then as you start to transition into the late luteal phase, which is like that last week of your cycle, this is where I see problems come up symptom-wise for my clients so much of the time. And it's not because it has to be that way. It's just because like in this last transition of your cycle, this is where your body shows symptoms the most often. And this is where things would come up like PMS, breast tenderness, sometimes even like some pre-period cramping. And PMS, I'm talking about mood changes primarily, whether that's a little bit of irritability, whether that's like full-fledged anxiety, depression, PMDD. There's a varied response that can happen. And hormonal acne can come up in this phase. There's lots of things that can come up in this phase. And if you are having those type of symptoms and don't know this, I want you to know that is not normal and that there's always something your body's telling you. That it probably goes back to a million other things, because what you said before about hormones being secondary, I fully agree with that. There's going to be lots of things that are contributing to that. With that being said, in the like happy, smooth waves of your cycle, even this late luteal phase can be pretty like slow and steady phase where it's not necessarily a crash. And even in that, I typically see that like a couple days before your period starts, there will often be a time of kind of a little bit more low social energy, low physical energy. For example, I went and worked out today at a gym in a class where I was like doing what they said, which I don't typically do. And I was like, yep, definitely starting my period in 2 days, because 2 days before that, I was killing it. And today I was not killing it. Also, it was like 97 degrees and there's not air conditioning. So it was just like so hot. But
So
I could
many
just
things.
tell a difference. I could tell a difference in my body. And because of the knowledge that I have, it's not like, what in the world happened? Now I suck. It's just, oh, yep, here we are. Like, this is a good day to take it a little slower and to not look at those girls who are ovulating and like running laps around me. That's fine. They can do that.
Understanding self is empowering, and
It
all
really
of our
is.
menstrual cycles are different.
Absolutely. So kind of what I would consider to be a smooth transition in this phase would be just little dip in maybe social energy, physical energy again, where you just, again, like really like to just have a little cocoon and maybe do what you want instead of maybe what you planned to do. And in business, this is something that I think is so interesting. I've talked to a lot of women who get to the end of their cycle and the last couple days of their cycle get crazy overwhelm, imposter syndrome. Everyone else is doing things better than me, and I should probably quit. Like some version of that, which I think is so funny because I actually had that every month for a while, and something has smoothed out where I don't feel that way anymore. But I've talked to lots of women who are like, oh, yes,
We're all
every
just
single
twins.
month I feel that way.
I find.
Yeah.
I find I'm just mirroring the clients that I have also. I've come to enjoy it and find it amusing at this point. Oh, we're all exactly the same. I want to zoom in on a couple particular symptoms that bother people a lot and talk about those, but I want to recap for a moment. And you mentioned hormonal acne, and since I see a ton of eczema, I always joke, if we had a dime for everyone who had an extra breakout, like right around ovulation or right before their menstrual cycle, I could buy myself some coffee for sure. And I will also mention that, and maybe I'm jumping around here a little bit, but to your point, the week before your menstrual cycle could be looked at as this cool time to just a pulse on your health if you're cruising, right? Because if you have an increase in symptoms, it's, interesting. For me, I know myself well enough. I'm not genetically blessed with elimination and clearance and detoxification. And that's what's happening around that time, that I'm clearing out excess hormones that I'm not going to be using in pregnancy. And essentially what this looks like is if the traffic jam is happening, if I have too much toxic burden and I'm not clearing things efficiently, then I have to be careful with coffee or it gets me all jacked up right those couple days before my menstrual cycle. I actually just noticed that for a handful of months in a row. And I was like, wow, I need to not do that. Funny story, not a shocker. I was drinking organic coffee instead of mycotoxin-free coffee. And for me, this is a big deal. As a result, I did drink more than I needed to of coffee before day 1 of my menstrual cycle today. Did not feel really noticeably amped up whatsoever. And as a fun aside, little other pearl, I think that body odor can have a lot to do with your toxic burden and even like the smell of your menstrual cycle blood, etc. But in general, I talk about, people ask me about body odor all the time. My clients do. And so I was just talking about it today with clients, and I was lamenting, or I was not lamenting, I was like recalling that, oh, since I switched to mycotoxin-free coffee, which I did, and then I bought organic because I was in Costco saving money. And then I was like, nope, not working for me. I need mycotoxin-free coffee because I have history of mycotoxin exposure, which, by the way, a lot of people do. So anyway, I'm just sharing this because anytime I could offer some funny insight for you, maybe it's not that crazy, or maybe there's simple things we can do to love and support ourselves. I love everything you said here. So I'm going to summarize what I heard also. And you did a beautiful job talking about the phases. I do feel personally for me that the menstrual cycle phases are a little bit like I'm like, am I going to be tested on that? On like what those dates are? It's a little bit of a different language. Yeah. And if it's a little bit too much of a language for today, I would just invite you to accept that around your menstrual cycle, you will have this dip in physical and social energy. And the most useful thing you said about that cycle to me that I heard was like, you can be introspective and planning. I was like, thank you for describing my life. Literally. I was like, my co-pilot asked me, can you take this many people in September yesterday? And I was like, that's a hard question to answer today. Let me look at the calendar tomorrow and forecast that for a few months from now and just see where I'm at. But to that point, like literally I've been enjoying that. Let me just check the calendar, check that I'm not overextended. And I love that you said this is wonderful because I have the tendency to overfill that plate all the time or overfill the calendar. And this part of your month may help prevent you from accidentally doing that. This is a huge life hack for all people who sometimes might overdo things. So let's just go ahead and underline that and highlight it. It's brilliant. Yeah. Very brilliant. So thank you for sharing.
It really makes a difference.
Huge.
Yeah. And again, I agree with you. Like I just feel like you can go way too far with cycle syncing and the phases. And I didn't even talk about like foods that you can eat or exercises you can do. Like you can find, in my opinion, too much information on the internet. And I've really gotten away from like the typical like cycle syncing foods or whatever with my clients because just truly it's often too much to be thinking about that. And like, how do I grocery shop now? And how do I grocery shop now? But like when we look at what are the basic things that are going to support our bodies, what are the basic nutrients we always need to support detoxification and to support good gut health and to support energy and blood sugar balance, like those are the things that are going to help your cycle long term, so much more than seed cycling or eating broccoli sprouts on day 17.
Yeah, I agree.
It gets way
adds
too
stress, it circumvents the potential benefit. And like you, this doesn't actually feel realistic or sustainable. And the reality is like your energy for this is ebbing and flowing throughout the month. The reality is the execution may not be. And personally, some of those things, I just don't see enough benefit. So I, like you, feel exactly the same, not surprisingly. So I like to just associate it around the time that you have the bleed right before, right? And then the other half, the opposite time frame, right? Where you're more creative. But to that point, one thing that's cool, and I don't know, I was thinking when you were talking about this, and here we are, I'm on day 1, your menstrual cycle's in a couple of days, and here we are having a conversation, like trying to be creative, and it's a comedy show. Like maybe someday in our lives, we'll record podcasts only in the ovulation phase. But also the reality is you can't jam your entire life into 1 week. So you just try your best. And I show up and I'm just honest with people now. And this is where I sometimes hack things with nutrients. I'm like, I'm going to rally today and my brain's going to work and I'm going to do some nutrients to make things work. A couple things since we're talking about menstrual cycles that come up a lot, and it might be easy stuff. So we talked a little bit about symptoms. We talked about acne. We talked about all types of mood things. And that's the thing, is it does present different ways. I do want to talk a little bit about bloating right before menstrual cycle. I do find that one I have to remind myself of every once in a while, and clients of. Pretty much anytime a client's this is happening out of nowhere, I'm like, let's go over to this column. Yep, it looks like it's this. Looks like it's the week before your period. Okay, all things are normal. Can you tell people what's happening at that time to create that particular symptom?
Yeah, so I do think bloating can be obviously like anything, it can be a little bit more personal, but when there's a couple different things that are happening close to the end of your cycle. You're at the end of your progesterone, and I forgot to say this or didn't quite get to it, but like at that very end of your cycle, those couple days, like that's when your hormones are dropping off again to finish the whole cycle. But that last week or so before your period, progesterone is dominant, and progesterone is to some extent, a relaxing hormone. And so sometimes there can be a little bit more. And I personally would say this is likely in the instance of mineral imbalance or like depletion and also issues with detoxification. There can be a little bit more water retention, which can cause some bloating. There can also be a little bit of a slowdown in the contraction of the intestines, which can like just slow down digestion a little bit. And then there's also an increase in something called prostaglandins, which are a little bit more inflammatory. So I would say typically I would think that one of those factors or all three of them together are probably contributing to bloating. But I see that most often in someone who's having some sort of issue with the food they're eating in the first place, along with like potentially detoxification issues or other things that are causing that rise in inflammation during that part of the cycle.
And prostaglandins might also be the reason that you have the period poops as well, potentially.
Absolutely.
Before I move past temp tracking, because I do think it can be a really useful thing, we didn't really touch on it. You said you generally just track maybe first day. Do you want to offer anything around temp tracking? Because people have lots of different feelings about it. And the conversation here has an underlying conversation about simplification.
So I personally love temperature tracking. I love making it as simple as possible, which in my opinion is either just buying like a basic thermometer. If you're a great person at taking your temperature every morning and you remember, do that, put it in one app every single time, look at it every once in a while. If you don't know what to do with it, then I love the book Taking Charge of Your Fertility, or like I said, in the Kindara app, the knowledge base is really helpful. I think often it is very helpful if you're starting to track your cycle and like looking at temps, especially for reasons of wanting to improve hormones or wanting to improve fertility, to have someone looking at it with you. I think it can just be like a night and day difference in how valuable it is to you. So that's why I love doing that. So I typically, though, if someone's having hormone issues, I want them to track because I want to know exactly when they're ovulating. I want to know how long their luteal phase is, where the issues are with estrogen detoxification. I can see a lot of that through temperature. So I personally love temperature tracking. And I think there's seasons in life where it's really helpful and seasons where it's not. So if we're looking for a problem, I want to do your temperatures. You can also use, I like the temp drop. I know there's mixed feelings on that, but it's just one that a little thermometer you put on your arm. Love that, especially for moms who have kids that are getting them up in the night and their temperatures might just be a little off because of that. And it's just also really great for people who are either mouth breathing, which is not great and something else we can work on, but mouth breathing or really bad at remembering to take your temperature in the morning. So sometimes just simplifying it with a temp drop is great. But I wouldn't recommend diving into temp tracking if you're like, I think my hormones are fine and I know exactly when I ovulate because I have symptoms, whether just like a minor symptom, like I have that little bit of pain and I feel it, or I'm watching my cervical mucus and I know for sure that I'm ovulating, then I would say it's almost something to start with when you're trying to understand your cycle because it can give you so much information. And so typically what you're looking for is you're just looking for a pattern of lower temperatures at the first half of your cycle. And then you'll see a change to a pattern of higher temperatures. And that's usually somewhere between 0.3 to 0.5 or even more degrees higher. So for example, say you're 97.5 the first half of your cycle, and then you pop up to 98, around 98 the second half, you're just looking for a pattern. So it's going to be like 97.3, 97.5, 97.4. And then you're going to see that it's like around 98. And that would be a sign that ovulation has occurred. And you can be really understanding better what's happening in your cycle because of that information. So that's why I like temperatures so much. And I like them because it's something you can track every single month. And if we're doing hormone testing, we're not going to do that every single month. And we're not going to be able to track progress the same way as we could with doing a temp tracking chart every month. And 3 months down the road, we're like, wow, look how much of a difference there is here. Not only in your temperatures have increased, your metabolism is better, but you have a longer luteal phase, or we see more irregularity, or like those type of things. So I do really love tracking. And when it's overwhelming, we just try to make it more simple. And like I said, right now, I don't really have any reason that I need to be tracking. I know when I ovulate, I can my luteal phase is not problematic. I have regular cycles, so I'm not tracking because my temp drop broke and I don't know where my thermometer is.
And temp drop is just an expensive thermometer that syncs up with that app, doesn't it? Doesn't it just automatically plug it in there for you?
Yes. It's an expensive thermometer and it's not, I don't like it because it syncs necessarily. I like it because you wear it on your arm and it's something, it's like you wear it like under your armpit. So I think you get a better read than like the Ava bracelet or like the Aura ring or something like that.
You put it on before bed?
But it's just a little more automated.
You just put it on before bed, so it's automatically there? Okay. I did not realize that because
you just wear it.
I just did not have an interest in buying it, so therefore I've never used it and I didn't realize it. Would you qualify, you made a statement about mouth breathing and why temp drop is better. Are you talking about thermometer in the mouth? Is that what you mean? Like taking
That's
oral
what I'm
temperature?
Doing an oral sure. But if you are chronically mouth breathing or even working on mouth breathing, you're not going to get as accurate of a temperature.
Perfect. Just double checking. Cool. Fun. Okay. So we covered the cycles. We talked about how to make that most advantageous in your business, in your motherhood, when you might want to curl up and watch a movie with your children or read a book or just snuggle. That works too, versus be out at the pool with whoever. We talked about apps. We talked about awareness is like really the first step. If you can cultivate any awareness around something, that's great. Leisha shared all the things around the names of the cycles. And then I shared that I like to just keep in mind the opposite of my period, which is okay. Both are fine. And I'm not in a phase of childbearing. So that's part of my detachment from certain things. Yet your menstrual cycle is still such a vital sign. So I still like to look at, do I have any symptoms around my period as an overall measurement of what's going on with my health? I still consider it every single month. Lastly, anything, we talked about business, we talked about motherhood. Is there anything you want to say about your menstrual cycles and your partner that wasn't mentioned? Or maybe the question a better fit is, how can someone convey to their partner how they might be feeling? And what do you have anything you want to say about that realm?
Yeah, I think it's really helpful. So I would say this is going to be most helpful if you are having a lot of symptoms with your menstrual cycle. And I totally agree and love what you said about there are going to be places in your life where you're paying more attention to your cycle because there are symptoms. But I fully believe that it is a sign of our health as women. And it's a gift when it doesn't feel like a gift when you're having symptoms necessarily, but you get to have those symptoms each month as a reminder that something's happening that you can work on. But as far as getting your partner on board and like understanding your cycle, so there's an app that I haven't used in a long time, but it's the My Flow app. And they actually you can just sign up, put in the first day of your period or whatever, and it'll send you an email or send you a message on your phone that'll say what phase of your cycle you're in, but it'll also send your partner something by email if you want. So that's a super easy way for them to start learning a little more about your
Automation.
cycle. Super fun.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's like the super easy, option for getting them on board. But also as you're learning more, you can just throw things out there. I told my husband this morning, you know what, that workout wasn't real fun for me. And I just changed up a few things for myself because I don't want to overdo it when I'm about to be on my period, because that will cause symptoms for me. Typically, like even if it's just, I feel more tired because I didn't need to work out that hard. And my husband understands that because I talk about this all the time. But also sometimes I'm like, I think he really doesn't know as much as I think he does for how much I talk about this, because I don't always talk about it to him. So I think
reasonable.
Just
like
doesn't
experience
really sharing what you're actually feeling. Yeah, exactly. Just sharing what you're feeling and not, I think I should feel this way on day 14, but just, hey, I've been paying more attention the last month or two and I notice 8 days before my period, I'm always grumpy. So how about on that day, why don't you take the kids somewhere for a little bit and I'll clean the house by myself and I'll have a great time. Like just having those little conversations. I'll say this really quick. One thing, especially with PMS mood symptoms, especially when they're like moderate and not severe, I love to really pay attention to what day they show up. So it's okay, it's 3 days before my cycle starts. Then I want you to heavily communicate with your partner and with yourself and realize 5 days, 4 days before my period starts, I'm going to fill my cup as much as possible. Like I want it to be overflowing. And the way that it's so helpful to communicate to your husband and to your kids is, hey, I know you've noticed, get a little itchy, a little irritable those 3 days before. And I know that if I have a little bit of extra time to myself, or I have a little bit of extra help, or I get more sunshine, like I'm going to feel better and I'm going to be happier and nicer. And full responsibility on you for what you choose to do, of course. But in my experience, most husbands are very on board with, hey, I think this is going to help me be less grumpy for 3 days. Could you put the kids to bed while I take a bath? They're going to be like, yes, I can. Totally can.
Yeah.
Especially when you just communicate it clearly like that.
Yeah. I think we could listen back if anyone needed ideas. And actually now my second daughter goes through what feels like hormonal mood swings. I'm like waiting for first day of menstrual. And this is actually a reminder to me to start having conversations with her about how she might feel around that time frame based on everything else in life. So another reminder just for me that it's not just me, it's also these other women in my household. Leisha, you did a great job dropping resources and different things. I think we probably could have kept talking about this, but in, again, the spirit of simplifying, what if we view it as a gift? And I think the other thing that you said is, what if any symptoms that we do have, we look at as opportunities and optional symptoms. I feel like symptoms can be optional and they are opportunities to make some shifts that will then have a domino effect of positivity in the rest of our body. So how lucky are we to be able to have this monthly reminder of whatever our body needs if we just tune in? Where can people find you online?
So the best place to find me is my podcast, the Happily Hormonal Podcast. And then my website is leishadrews.com and my Instagram is just at Leisha Drews. So easy to find.
Yeah. Thanks so much for coming on today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This is always fun.
Just keep breaking. I gotta get myself a little more faith.